Hi, everybody. My name is Jen Barnhill. I'm the host of Military Dinner Table Conversations, and I'm really excited to talk with everybody. And I know we have a few more people coming in. Just want to go over some ground rules first. In order to talk about this conversation, we kind of need to be thoughtful of everyone's participation. Typically, I'll ask questions. I'll throw polls into the chat for everyone to answer. That will help drive the conversation based on your responses. In order to participate, which this is on you as the guests to talk about your experiences and what you see in the community, even if it's not your firsthand experience, is to either raise your hand virtually, physically, or come off mute, and then I'll call on you to share. And then we'll just make sure we give everyone an opportunity to talk. It's gone really well. Feel free to use the chat to talk with each other. If you share personal information with each other, that is not something I'm going to share with anyone else. So like if you share an email with a friend, that's great. Feel free to do that. But it won't go out into the summary. I'm really excited to be joined today by a friend, Austin Carrigg, who is do you call it the founder of the Exceptional Families of the Military? And is it CEO or executive director? How do you, what's your,
So I'm the CEO. I don't normally tell people I'm the founder, but yes, I'm the CEO at EFM.
sorry. I've been around too long and I know too much. So I apologize, Austin. But we're joined today, for those of you who don't know this format, she's going to help facilitate the conversation as an expert on things EFMP and PCSing. So Austin, if you don't mind giving a little bit of an introduction as to who you are, and then we'll get started with the conversation.
Yeah, so I am a Army spouse. My husband has been active duty for 22 plus years. We have three kiddos and myself on EFMP. So I feel like we've kind of navigated all spectrums of EFMP from like I'm just enrolled for an ADHD diagnosis to our little girl who is very, very complicated. And through kind of those life experiences is really how EFMP came about. EFM came about for us. And so really the things that we work on at EFM is all of the things that affect your lives every day. And that's why I love to talk to people about it, because I want to hear from families just like yours about the things that are going really well in EFMP, because there are some things that are working and then the things that aren't quite working.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Austin. There's so many topics within EFMP to kind of touch on. One that I really wanted to hone in on today to help influence the articles that I'm writing about this community is how PCSing is impacting EFMP families. We know that the transition has an impact on all military families, but EFMP families have, additional challenges. I'm interested to hear more about what brought you to this conversation as it relates to this topic. Have you recently experienced a PCS where something went really well, the assignment coordination went as intended, or alternatively, did you, tell them this is your family's need, we're in this program, and we arrived at our new location only to find this service wasn't available? Just open the floor for questions. And as I say in almost every one of the calls that I have, I am patient and I will wait, and awkward silences do not bother me. So I'll just open the floor to you. What brought you to this conversation about this topic?
So maybe if I can, Jennifer, I'll start for everybody. So when Jennifer and I started talking about this, we know that it's PCS season. We know everybody is moving, but I told her that we hear from a lot of our families that there are things that happen that are really, really hard during the PCS process. And so I'm guessing at least a couple of you on here have probably been through similar things. And maybe that's why you're here, but you don't want to say it out loud.
I'll go, I guess.
Yeah.
Hey guys. Sorry, I was gonna go second because this is my first time being here. Thanks for having me. I wanted to contribute to the conversation because this is we're 1 year into our PCS, so it's still a little fresh for me. And I kind of wanted to pick your guys' brain regarding how this is my first experience being on EFMP. So last year I left Little Rock and we were doing our out processing to move overseas to Germany. And so I was doing physical therapy for my back and neck. I was had mental health, so I was meeting with a therapist, and I had migraines. So those were kind of my referrals that I was going through. And right before we left, so I had my going away like appointment or whatever, they said, "Oh, okay, you have too many referrals. We're signing you up for EFMP, and now you have to get off EFMP. You got to get cleared to move overseas." So this was just like a couple months before, like the couple months before you leave, sort of like out process sort of thing. So that kind of threw me for a loop that they're like signed me up for that. And then was like, good luck on that. Figure out how to move to Ramstein, which then required me having to provide documents that I wasn't ready to provide and having to go through that whole loop to be able to prove that I could get over to Germany. And I realized that, and I don't know if anyone else has gone through this, but it seems kind of like a gatekeeping over there. Once you like apply to like go over there, they're like, "Oh, you have a lot of problems, rejected. You have to prove extra stuff to be over here," which took a lot of extra stress, a lot of extra documents, a lot of trying to prove. We ended up getting approved 1 week before we had to get on a plane to head over to Ramstein. So we already had orders, so it kind of came in reverse because of how they did it. And so I was kind of curious on how is the process even, how do you get checked to get on EFMP? Like how many referrals do you need in order to be in the program? Because I kind of got thrown in for that. And I didn't know if anyone else had any issues finding kind of gatekeeping. I understand the concept. There's 6,000 people that go through Ramstein. They want to make sure that they can take care of the people there. But regarding mental health and regarding physical therapy, those things were easily acceptable or accessible. So it kind of seemed more like they only have one medical examiner for all of Europe. So it's a really slow process in order to get there. So I kind of just want to throw that out. I'm sorry, I'm not exactly sure on the format. And that's kind of my experience and kind of thrown into EFMP.
Awesome. Well, I'm sorry that you had to go through that, but unfortunately, I am sure Austin has lots of feedback. And as far as the process, I know I used to be familiar with more of like getting overseas, but now that standardization has started to roll out, I think that there are certain processes that might have changed since I learned about it. I don't know if anyone has anything to add to kind of uh, maybe have a similar experience or to Danielle that might be willing to share. Austin, have you heard anything about people PCSing and experiencing something similar?
So I think I can answer some of your questions. So they are gatekeeping it. Absolutely, that is happening. And the reason really why is that they want to be able to take care of the families who are there and receive a diagnosis and then need the help, as opposed to taking new families over and then not having the resources available to serve people when things do come up. And I hear you, mental health seems very small in a lot of ways, but it also depends on how many times are you seeing the mental health provider, what type of mental health provider. And that's really kind of how things are looked at and changed. We do hear from families all the time who say, "Look, I found care." And some of the branches are allowing you to appeal a denial, which it sounds like you maybe didn't get denied, but you had to provide. Yep. And so it can be a little back and forth depending on the branches, but that's the reason that they are gatekeeping, is because they're trying to leave the resources open for those families who are there and don't have a diagnosis and then find themselves needing it and not having to be rushed back to the US to receive care because nothing's available, because that would be really traumatic after you, especially you get a mental health diagnosis and now you have to PCS before you can find that care.
Thank you. Can I add to that? Is it okay if I add? So I'm here as I work with families in the military through our program, and so but I'm here as I'm here because I want to learn about ways to help families advocate for themselves for the transfer of services during PCS time. So that's why I'm here. But I can add in a little bit of my experience with EFMP and mental health, especially overseas. There's different practice patterns for mental health overseas, particularly, well, everywhere in Europe, but even in Germany, which seems like it should be very similar. There are, we can't provide behavioral health services for family members at all. So our clinic is actually in a little bit of a behavioral health crisis right now. So, so everything that Austin said is true. And I know it doesn't, I know it probably feels awful to have somebody else put the brakes on your move. But anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, and even from a non-EFMP PCSing OCONUS perspective, it feels like gatekeeping. Just full transparency, my children and my family are not enrolled in EFMP. I've worked alongside EFMP organizations multiple times, but it is a disjointed process to get overseas. I think it is, but it like everything else, it's like EFMP is extra layers upon layers of things to think about. So if you're starting with it's not a smooth process, and then you're adding in extra layers, the bumps feel bumpier, I think. I don't know if that rings true for anyone. But thank you for sharing. Anyone else would like to share of the reason that they're joining the call? Any examples of PCS challenges and or questions that you have that you think we should talk about today? Oh, Karen, go for it.
Hi, Austin. Hi, Jennifer. It's good to see you guys. I work in government relations at the Military Officers Association of America, so I'm primarily here in listen mode. I'm always looking for ways to hear more about what's going out there on the ground, so we know what to advocate for to improve situations. I've been doing this for almost 12 years now, and I have a question which is probably pretty basic, but I wanted to run it by. I think Austin might be able to answer this. I'm wondering, are you seeing EFMP families being denied orders to accompany the service member for CONUS moves? Is that a thing that's happening where the family has to separate because resources aren't available at CONUS duty stations?
So what we've been told from Big DoD is that unaccompanied CONUS orders are statutorily not approved unless it's a blanket approval like went out over COVID. So during COVID, they were able to do it, but every secretary has to agree to it, and it's something that would go across the entire force. Now, we do hear families choosing to stay behind, and I say choosing very lightly. I know it's not a choice, but the military calls it choosing. But technically, they're not supposed to give unaccompanied CONUS orders because there's statutory regulations that prohibit them from doing it.
Okay, that's helpful. And for those families that are making that difficult choice, are they being accommodated, for instance, with BAH and the higher cost of living area or anything like that? Or is it simply, it's up to them, they have to suck it up in terms of whatever financial implications there are?
So it's dependent on really who they're working with. So there is a BAH waiver that can be applied for, and some units are very easy to work with and they approve the paperwork. And then other units who really don't understand EFMP, you never know who you're going to get, are like, well, I don't understand why they can't come. They said that their EFMP packet went through and they're cleared. So like, it's your choice. And so technically, there are some small instances where families are told like care is not available, the service member has to come for a school, for instance. And if the family member is coming for the school, we're telling you care is not available, you can make the decision to come or not. And in those instances, they can also get family separation allowance if the family stays behind.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate you clearing that up.
Thanks. Dr. Holloway, welcome.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Good to be among everyone that's here. So I have a kind of a little bit unique situation. I don't know if can you hear me clearly?
Yep, we're good.
Okay. So I have been I'm a veteran and served in PCS. Then I got married to someone who was in the Army years later, and I was a military spouse, and we did the PCSing and had issues with that. And then so I'm not with that person who was in the Army no more. She got out. And then I worked as a contractor and civilian, working for Employment Readiness Program, which is for Army Community Services, which worked with EFMP, those type of programs. I'm a certified school counselor. So all of that tied into the work that I kind of did with working with Army necessarily, with civilians and working with military personnel, PCSing and the issues with it. And then, so now as a civilian, years later, I have my own LLC and I do consulting. I'm an organizational psychologist. So what I've been able to do in combining all that together is to work with personnel, with DoD, with forming plans that would really support, that really don't match up with like legislature and what's going on. And there's always been issues with that. So without that proper advocacy, it's usually difficult to get these things case by case. And so quite a few things that I do now that is helping individual families are working together with an installation. So that's kind of the work I do now. But I've been through all of those type of things, and it is very difficult. And I'm hoping we can get some things changed and around during this while Trump is in, and then when he's out. Obviously, when that happens, there probably will be some more movement. So just trying to prepare families for when we have these difficult shifts in our services that we offer. So that's a little bit about my background.
Thanks. Thank you for sharing. Appreciate that. I think Michaela was next.
Hi, how are you? I'm really here on receive mode, kind of too. I'm active duty myself. We are EFMP family. We're mill to mill. So kind of navigating those things have been, work to kind of keep me in. But the one of the things that I wanted to ask about was the BAH waiver that was mentioned. I'm also a senior enlisted leader of my unit, and I didn't know there was a BAH waiver out there for GeoBatch folks, and I would love to have more information on that. And then also, what was the other thing? The waiver to remain in housing if the family is staying in housing. But the main reason why I kind of found myself here in this meeting was because we recently received an assignment to Ellsworth Air Force Base. So I'm Air Force. I don't know if I mentioned that, but we recently received an assignment to Ellsworth Air Force Base. I really worked on trusting the process and hoping, that if we were approved to proceed, that all of the resources would be there. And if not, working through whatever happens next. So we were not approved to proceed, and we went ahead and canceled the assignment on our side through our process. And so my main question kind of in that realm is, I understand the standardization things are going through for the DoD for all services. And I was just curious if there is more information that us families and service members could get to see what the overall intent, like the different benchmarks and the goals, and like where we see ourselves when this whole standardization stuff goes through. Because having worked with a few joint military partners and at different bases, I've heard of how Army did things and how the Navy did things and how the Air Force, and I know how the Air Force does things for the most part, being EFMP myself. And so just the logic, I guess, behind the standardization process, like categories versus you get an assignment and then you get cleared for movement. So that's why I'm here. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for sharing. I think standardization has been something that's on everyone's mind, wanting to understand not only how the decision-making process is, but also potentially how the lived experiences are playing out for families. That's, what I'm interested in is how is it playing out for you all? Thank you for sharing. Amanda?
Thank you. So we got our household goods on Monday. I'm staring at a wall of boxes. Today's the first day my husband has not been at work since we got here. So we are in the throes of it. We're an Air Force family, who was previously at an Army installation, and now we're at a Navy installation. We're EFMP because of my son. He has autism and ADHD. And for us and our experiences, we've been trying to navigate all the differences between the branches, right? Because we, haven't been really at an Air Force installation since we've received my son's diagnosis. And so our last installation, it took us a year and a half to get to the bottom of why there were so many inconsistencies between the servicing base and the installation we were at, and then the host group. And what we discovered was there are a lot of inconsistencies in the MOUs and the MOAs and the agreements on who's providing services where. And so that's something that we've really been I was working on before we left our last duty station. And so I really just kind of wanted to get a feel for, is our experience unique to us, or are other families, struggling with this? When you work in a career field that is very heavy on different branches instead of, just working with Air Force families or whatnot. And so us being right in the middle of it, I thought it was really great timing. One of my other pet projects is I volunteer with the DoD's Child Collaboration Study, which is a patient-centered research, is who's funding it. And so we kind of drive some of the other research that's being done. And we actually meet with the Office of Special Needs on Monday. And so I also was like, oh, this is really great timing, because we're going to be able to kind of speak into some of that. Hopefully, the last time we met with the OSN, I think we blew their socks off. Just letting them know, like, your policies have good intent, but, in my experience, and in I think a lot of other families' experiences, they're not fleshing out on the end the way that maybe they were intended, and getting to the bottom of that. So I just wanted to kind of hear everybody else's stories, and curious if mine was unique.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Jennifer?
We PCS'd 2 years ago now. And it was for my husband got picked up for battalion command. He's Army. And anytime we PCS, he always hands me the list and is like, hey, go through this, see where we can go. And then I will rank our choices from there. He did the same thing for battalion command. He's an MP. And so anyways, he ranked everything according to the places that we could go. First one being Fort Bragg, second Fort Hood. And then the second, I can't remember. I feel like it's been so long since then, and so many things have happened. But anyways, when it came to getting selected for battalion command, we got thrown for a loop, and he was selected for Fort Sill, Oklahoma, which, if anybody knows where that is, it's like the middle of nowhere. And all of the care, I have 3 medically complex children who are enrolled in EFMP. And so that would have had me driving mainly to like Dallas and Houston for all of our care. When we asked the question, hey, like, who cleared us EFMP wise? And we were told it was Big Army that kind of like did a general clearance, and then a more specific clearance might happen. So, but they suggested like, hey, maybe you can call the EFMP coordinators there at Fort Sill, and they'll explain it to you more. And when I called the EFMP office at Fort Sill, and I said, hey, this is who we are. Fort Sill isn't huge. It's basically basic training battalions. And so she knows everyone. And so she was like, I don't know who you are. I didn't clear you to come here. And basically like the conversation was, I will not clear y'all to come here. If that's the case, because of all of the specialty care that you need for your children. So then my husband and I had a really hard conversation, like, okay, does he just end his career now because like basically if you defer battalion command, like that's what you're doing. And so, or like, do we kind of push this? So I went ahead and I had to research not only Fort Sill, but all of the other basic training battalion, like in case they came back and said, oh, well, you can go to like Fort Leonard Wood or Fort Jackson. So I looked at all of them up. And Austin can confirm this because she probably heard my rants on the daily for like that week that we were going through this crisis. But anyways, and I confirmed that we couldn't go to any of the other basic training battalions. And the thing I think that irritated my husband, hurt or not irritated, but like really deeply hurt, and he felt like almost betrayed by the Army that he had given at that time like nearly 20 years of service and like, you know, however many deployments he did, was the fact that like he did not try to go somewhere that we could not go with him. You know what I mean? Like you always kind of hear EFMP families that are like, well, if I get off this, like, can I go to Japan? And it's like, he's like, I didn't even try. He explained to HRC, like, I didn't even try to do that. I only picked places I knew that I would get approved for, and y'all still threw me here. Like, I don't get it. Why? And no one could explain anything. And so then they emailed him and said, hey, ask your wife if y'all can go to Austin and you can do battalion command at Army Futures Command. And did a quick search, and it looked like, yes, we can go there. However, once we got here, again, Austin can confirm because she heard my rants on the daily when we moved here, no one would take over my middle son's care because he is severely autistic. And I talked to Texas Children's, I talked to Dell Children's, I talked to numerous community, like small clinics to try to take over my son's care. And everybody was telling me that he is too autistic, too severe, and they would not take him because he has a history of aggression. So it's like things like that that I hear, like little pieces like coming up from EFMP families. Like those are probably more like what we experience. But it really, honestly, it felt like a huge betrayal. Like when we went through that process, like we had given, you know, almost like my husband 20 years of service, and then only for that to like sort of feel like, hey, look, we've never tried to go anywhere that we can't go, and y'all still tried to send us somewhere where you knew we were going to get rejected. Like, we didn't understand it. And so it's hard. Okay, I'll stop there. Sorry.
No need to apologize. Thank you for sharing. I'm going to go to Destiny, but I do want to touch on this. Like, are any other experiences that might be similar where, you know, you're trying to navigate and assist, right? Like do the research, do the helping. And that is anyone else experiencing something similar is my question. But Destiny, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to go in line with your question of experiencing what Jennifer mentioned, because that is actually where my husband left active duty. So he was initially intending on doing 20 years. And I've been a military brat and then became a military spouse. And so I'm in EFMP for asthma, eczema, things like that, right? Which is a lot easier to like, oh, we can find you support for that. But we were stationed at Fort Polk, which I think is still Johnson now, in Louisiana. And that's where our son got his autism diagnosis. And we were initially going to Germany, which is where we had requested. And we had got cleared for EFMP. Then he got his diagnosis and he got his IEP. And then they were like, oh, wait, we have to redo this because now we have to see if they have the support. I will say, thankfully, we did not go because they did deny us, because they did say that they didn't have support for him. And where we did go did have support for him. And he got exactly what he needed. And it was great because, so I don't know if this is still the reason, but when I spoke to the EFMP person there for medical for Fort Johnson Polk, they were sending families there because they were supposed to have support for autistic learners and supposed to have what they need. And they absolutely 100% did not. So for people that don't know me, Jennifer knows me, but I am a mental health therapist and I'm a non-attorney special education advocate. And I eventually was diagnosed myself as autistic and ADHD. And so that's why when Jennifer was talking, I rolled my eyes at that he was so severe autistic, they couldn't support him, because I was like, it's like literally your job, but whatever. And so, um, so when we were there, I was seeing the lack of support, especially on the educational side. And we could have all been diagnosed with PTSD after what we experienced at the school on that base, which is why where we went next, which is Fort Benning / Fort Moore. And everyone's experience is different, and I say this all the time, but the school that we had and the team that we had for my son was amazing, and they gave him everything that he needed. So that's why I say we were grateful, even though we really wanted to go to Germany. We were grateful that we didn't, because the team that he got access to was what he needed. But when we were at Fort Polk / Johnson, after they decided about the Germany situation, the first thing, my husband is Army and he's an officer. The first thing that they had stated was, well, you can come to Germany and then we can just figure out your family situation. And my husband was like, absolutely not. He was like, I'm not leaving. And we had already experienced all the hurdles we were experiencing with my son in school and trying to get him what he needed. And so my husband was like, what if I get over there, which is what eventually happened when he did not go. What if I get over there and then my family doesn't get approved? Now I am legally obligated to fulfill my contract, and my family has to go back home because we weren't staying in Louisiana. That was absolutely out because of what we had experienced. And so then it became, okay, now you're getting into your rating time, going to what Jennifer was speaking about and her husband. So my husband was coming out of company command. And so he was getting into his rating time towards being a major. And it was like, now you're getting into rating time. So they then tried to convince us to stay at Fort Polk and Fort Johnson for his career and his rating time. And my husband was like, I don't think that you understand that literally, if I stay here, my family might not make it, because my wife has stated I will not stay in Louisiana. And this is our 3rd year. So we were supposed to be PCSing, and before that they were in childcare and everything was great. And but he started school, and the school was just very ableist. And if people don't know what that term means, it means that they do not understand disabilities. They don't understand to support them. There's a little bit of a race factor there. My husband is Black, my children are Black, but there was also ableism in that there was a white family who was also military that had to go to the superintendent on them as well, because their white son was ADHD and they weren't understanding him and they were suspending him. So it was just a lot of issues in that regard. And so we were just like, I was like, we will not stay here. We will not continue to subject him to this. And if that means that I have to go back to Georgia, which is where we're from, then that's what we will do. And so he was just like, yeah, I'm not separating my family for rating time, for my career. I'm not going to do it. And I was team, like, if that's what we have to do for you to get what you need, then we'll do it. And so, because I wanted to support his career and I knew what I was getting into, but thankfully he was like, I don't want to separate my family for that. And so ultimately they finally came back and said, well, we'll let you choose where you would potentially like to go. And we're from Georgia. We have family in Georgia. And at this point, we're like, we just need support, because this year has been hell. And so we chose Fort Benning and Fort Moore. We'd already been stationed there previously, and we were closer to our family in that regard. So when we went there, my husband then decided, when we were looking at options, because he's armor, so there's only so many places you can go unless you change I'm thinking enlisted terms of MOS, and that's not what it's called for officers, but I can't think right now. And so he was just like, I do not think that this is serving me or my family anymore. And I'm unfortunately going to have to do what I have to do is best for my family. And so, and he didn't, and just the way he was treated and just the whole ending of that, where there was a lack of understanding about him being unwilling to sacrifice his child and his child's mental health for his career, just kind of disillusioned him against that. So he's reserved now because he still is very much like, this is, that's still who he is and what he wants to do. And he did the Service Now program, and he now has an IT civilian job. and our sons are thriving. And then we ended up getting our other son's diagnosed with ADHD, and he already had a speech delay. So we already knew again EFMP services and support. So I became an advocate because of that. And I wanted to join this to share my story because I've came across so many families who did not have my mental health background and knowledge, who did not have the capacity that I eventually had to throw all things into special education and advocacy and to learn and to recognize what my son needed and implement that. A lot of times families don't have that capacity. And they also don't have the professional backing for people to actually listen to them. And I think that military spouses get thrown into being on their own a lot. And my husband really had to shift his approach as well. So he was in command while also taking calls in the field and also like leaving work to go to the school. And because that's what we needed. And he recognized I was burning out on doing that after doing it for months for our son. But that came at a cost to his career. And I don't feel like it should be like that if we're talking about picking duty stations and things, because if you would have asked him 6 months earlier from that before our son entered kindergarten, he would have said, this is what I'm doing for 20 years. Then you ask him 6 months in, and he's like, I would rather have my son feel safe and comfortable and get what he needs than give the Army 10 more years of my life, and you don't even care if I lose my family. So that's really what it came down to. So I just wanted to share that because I hear that quite often from other families, particularly Black and Brown families. And it's just essentially accepted that you have to sacrifice your family to get things. And I don't feel like when we have EFMP and we have EFM Voice, who I've worked with before in a capacity in writing articles and stuff, who are really trying to put it out there, I feel like just more collaboration needs to be done to really prevent things like that, because I do think that was a situation that was preventable, but there's such strict standards, again, like rating time. And so when the list came out, obviously my husband did not get promoted. And he did not make the list because he did not have the rating time, because he chose to not stay and to start over to support his family.
I mean, that's a loss, like the military is losing folks. I'm sure your story isn't, the only one. Austin, did you have anything to share?
I just wanted to clarify, when we talk about EFMP education, that when you're in a CONUS location, the education is never considered, because they're going to say that every student has a right to a free and appropriate public education, so FAPE. So even though we have to provide our EFMP packets, we have to provide that educational piece. When they are doing CONUS moves, that is never considered. And I think that a lot of us don't realize that, because we think, oh, we're providing it, they're going to make sure they have the exact same school in the exact same setting. But they assume that because of FAPE, that any school district, anywhere they station you, is going to be able to cover that. And so I just think it's important that we know that up front, so that when you're looking at your requests to not be sent somewhere, you are addressing it from a different angle. If there's any way for you to address it from the medical angle, you really should look at the medical piece and not that education piece, because it's very hard to prove.
Yeah, and for us, we didn't look at, they actually, so again, the school was horrible. And so when they said they needed all of the documentation, part of that when they did the educational piece was they painted a picture of our son that was not accurate. And so then it was like, well, we don't think we can support a child with significant behavior concerns and issues. And we don't think we have the services to provide for him, which was obviously, again, not accurate. So it kind of, the picture they painted of how his autism was presenting was the inaccurate piece. I mean, I actually don't use labels of like high functioning, low functioning, or severe, not severe, because I think there's a lot of misinterpretation as well about what that actually means for a child in their diagnoses. But that was kind of essentially how he was painted, like what Jennifer was referring to, was just like, oh, he needs psychological support and he needs this and he needs that. And we don't think we can support that. And again, it worked out because we went somewhere that had all those things available, but then to know that the place we were coming from was identified as a place to support families like that, and to know that they were significantly failing was very concerning.
So I asked, a poll question about like, what do you do, when you find yourself in a location that can't support your child or yourself as, an adult in EFMP? Is there, I did not yet launch this, but because it's related to PCSing, but are there out-of-pocket costs? What is the overarching? I mean, I asked that question. I suspect I know the answer, but I see Destiny shaking her head because I know the answer. I know that there's out-of-pocket costs, but what other things do we need to consider above and beyond those out-of-pocket costs? Like what happens? Tanya?
So the out-of-pocket costs. My children I have one child who has autism, one who has ADHD, and my child with autism also has apraxia. We were stationed overseas from the time they were 4 until they were, how old were they came back? 9, 10, something like that. And then, as Austin said, when we came back, they kicked them over to the school system for their speech therapy and all those things. My child was not diagnosed with apraxia until they were 13. When we finally said, forget it, we're done with the military medical system, we're done with this. And we were stationed, it was actually only due to COVID because people weren't going to providers and having assessments done. So all of a sudden, the 12, 18, 24-month wait list were cleared. And so I was able to get my child in with a developmental ped, and they were able to get all the diagnoses that they needed. But really fun fact, when you have apraxia, they stop treating it at 13. So when your child isn't diagnosed until they're 13, they don't have any treatments that they will do through that, right? So then we had to start finding alternative therapies. And so the solution that we have found to supporting our children, because even my child with ADHD, we waited till COVID, found a wait list that cleared, and we paid out of pocket to have that assessment done. And what a blessing and a gift that we were able to afford that, right? Because that's not an inexpensive cost, and that's not an easy thing to do. And this is, again, like Destiny said, coming from someone who has a background in mental health and diagnoses and things like that. So we have paid out of pocket for almost every therapy that my children have had. We occasionally reimburse it through insurance, but typically not. We are TRICARE Select at this point, so that we have as much control over who our providers are as possible. So we can try to find some kind of consistency and continuity of care. It's one of those things where it's really frustrating because I advocated for my child from the time they were 4 to be like, listen, this kid's really bright, but their speech isn't quite there. And there's something going on, and there's something going on, and there's something going on. And no one even tried to find an answer until in some ways it was too late, right? So the question, what are the costs? I mean, like there's the financial cost, but then there's also the cost that my child still is working. Like my kid's 17 and there are still days that they're talking to me and I'm like, dude, start all over because we're hitting that wall again. And I just need you to try to slow it down, right? And then because my child is a brown child being raised in America, we can look at the broader perspective of that, of my child will always have to carry some kind of note in their car, on their person, whatever, that says, listen, I have autism and I have apraxia. And so maybe you're not going to be able to understand me, but please take a moment to try to. Right. So we're talking about like the social cost of that, the larger implications that come with not being able to access the care that these kids need when they need it. So
can I ask you a follow-up question, Tanya? Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Or it's to everyone, everyone's experiences. We're talking about PCSing. We know PCS moves cause disruptions on many levels, many layers in military families, jobs, security for spouses, fill in the blanks.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a solution? Is the solution staying in, like, is that the things we're hearing in the news of like having longer tours of duty, fewer PCS moves? Would that be good? Because I hear sometimes like, okay, you're in one location, you're paying out of pocket still. So like, is that a solution? What is the solution? Is there a solution?
I don't think there's one size fits solution for everyone, right? So we PCS last year. We actually stayed within the state of Virginia because in my mind we were transferring within the same state, so like schools and things would be equivalent enough. I was wrong. They are not. We left Northern Virginia and we had a really great support system as far as resources and things like that. But what we do have here that was a little bit harder there was some of the providers here have been easier to get in with and a little bit quicker because I don't know if it's, I mean, there's still high demand in this area. So like it's a give and a take of all of that, right? So we lost the support of having a really great school system that had all of the things in place to support my child with ADHD and to like give them the familiarity that they needed because we were there for about 5 years, which is longer than we've been anywhere. But on the flip side, so now that we're here, we're having to like reestablish these school supports that are not so great, but we've found some other good community supports. So I think that answer varies for family, right? Because sometimes you don't understand how great what you have is here until you leave it. And then you're like, oh God, that was actually really awesome. Or on the flip side, you're like, this is really great. And then you get somewhere else, you're like, well, actually, this is better, right? So I don't know that there's a clear-cut answer on that one.
Yeah, I mean, that's again true because there's such diversity in this community that like what one solution is not going to be the best for everyone. To that end, that poll question I just asked about compassionate reassignments, humanitarian moves, like when you're really in a bind and you really need to go somewhere, I would love to hear from anyone who might be willing to share either the application process to do that. And I see your hand raised, Kristen, so I want to give you time too, but I also want to know, like, is there any, what have those experiences been like? Because if that's the solution or a solution to hitting that wall with your child or with yourself and you need care, if that's the solution, is that solution an effective solution? Is it working as intended? Would love to hear from you all. Have you ever considered it? If you haven't done it, have you considered it? And what would put you in a place that made you consider it? That maybe is a better question for those who haven't, who maybe have not had that example.
I mean, we definitely considered it for Louisiana, and obviously we kind of made that decision ourselves. It came down to like, Germany kept calling and was like, we need to know if you're coming or not. And he was like, well, I'm waiting for them to clear my family for EFMP. And then they were like, well, you should go ahead and come. Because like I said, we were cleared and then we weren't. And the decision was pretty much made like, we're going to have to make a decision. And then when we weren't cleared, then he had to make a decision, am I going to go or not? And then we were like, well, if you go, obviously we're not going with you. And then because we weren't cleared to go. And so then when we started looking at other options, some of the options, like, again, like Jennifer said, and our children are on opposite sides. My children are not medically complex. And it was still a situation of like, they were pulling up options. And when I was looking into those options were also not feasible for our children and our family. And I think they almost got to a point where they were just kind of like, it felt like this guy is gonna choose what's best for his family. So just ask him to pick. That's what it really felt like. And then the option that my husband found and gave, because he was, now there's a portal and you go in and you look and see what's available and you can apply, was what they gave us. But it was just like, if they don't give you one of those options, even if you're stateside and they don't have what he needs after what we've experienced, then we will be separating and we have to do what we have to do. But I also, like Tanya, I've paid out of pocket for almost all of my children's care. We were waiting so long on the wait list that thankfully we got into a great school with great supports that by the time they circled back to us and we're finally like, we can get you in, he was doing great with what I was paying out of pocket for and with what he was getting with his school, that we no longer needed the service we were on the list for. But it's like, I was paying $150 out of pocket. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like everyone can't do that. They can't pay $150 every time their child sees whatever they need. And I've paid for play therapists, I paid for talk therapy, I paid for speech therapy, I paid for OT therapy. I paid for all of these things out of pocket, just to make sure my kids could get what they need, but everyone doesn't have the means to do that.
Good. Very true. Thank you, Destiny. Michaela?
So for the compassionate reassignment during COVID, actually go back a little bit further, just before COVID for 2 years, I was on a break-in service. I applied for the career intermission program, which allowed me to do the stay-at-home mom thing for a couple of years, which was awesome. But whenever I came back to service in Washington, we were in Washington State, and the school district that we were in was going to school for, I think it was 2 days a week. And the school district near my family, or the school districts actually, generally speaking, in the greater St. Louis area, seemed to be going to school like 4 days a week-ish at that point. And being back to service after 2 years, trying to remember how to active duty again was a lot. Plus, trying to make sure the kids were staying online and the toddler wasn't interrupting them, and chasing our special needs kiddo around with our iPad, trying to keep the teacher in his line of sight wasn't quite working. So we requested a letter from the school district showing that they weren't going to school more than 2 days a week, and that my son wasn't receiving all of his IEP needs, basically. And basically a letter showing that he wasn't getting everything he needed. And we turned that into our EFMP family support, I think it was. My husband did that part. He was the ranking member, so all our kids were under him at the time. So for the details, I don't have all those details, but they were like, we've never done anything like this before, so it's a toss-up whether you guys would get approved or not. And we were approved. We also had a couple of family members write letters of support saying that they were in a time in their life where they would be able to support us and help our kids that had to go online, and then also help us out with getting him to school and stuff like that too. So thankfully for us, that humanitarian assignment went through pretty quickly. We applied, I think it was November or the end of October, and by Thanksgiving we were approved, and then we were out of the base within like the first couple of weeks of December.
I'm glad to hear that you can get that process rolling and started. Austin and I had kind of chatted about online prior to this call is a lot of like our behavior in this community is based on perception of people's experiences or their perceptions of an experience instead of a lived experience. So I'm always happy to hear from people who actually gone through something good and bad. So and then we can kind of use that to inform these conversations. As we approach the end, I want to just give the floor to you all if there's anything else that you would like to share or any questions that you might have for myself or Austin. This doesn't have to be the end of the conversation. We're going to have another conversation tonight at 8 o'clock and kind of have some of these similar questions. So feel free to share with anyone else who might be in this program and has had an experience with PCSing and EFMP and these themes. But I want to let you all have the last opportunity to share, or feel free to drop it in the chat if you have any questions or would like to share. I think Kristen, you had your hand raised. Did you want to share?
Yeah, I just had a question. I know that when families I work with go back to the States, they have to start the whole process and they're on waiting lists. And I've tried to call places ahead of time to get kiddos put on a waiting list before they even move. So like 3 months before they move, can we get them on the waiting list for PTOT? And I haven't had any success with that. And I, in my mind, I think it would be wonderful to have some legislation that says people have to allow military families to put their names early on wait lists, because I don't understand what it's not really, even if you don't end up there, then you're just taken off the list. You're not taking up a spot.
Yeah, no, that's a great idea. I'm sure Austin might have some thoughts about that.
I can make it really fast. So I'm assuming they're telling you no because they don't have a referral and they need a referral in order to do so. So there is legislation in place that has just not been fully implemented that's going to allow your prior duty station to put in referrals for your new duty station. But the way around that for now is tell them that the family is going to use the point of service option, and the point of service option does not require a referral to use. They can find it on any of the region, Tri-West or Tri-Care East. The point of service option, there is a page for providers to understand that. And they can get on the wait list with the point of service option and still use a referral to then have it covered. So the family is not going to be stuck with that. They just have to know that if they don't have the referral, they would be paying the point of service option. But that's how we get around it, is we just say, oh, we're not doing that. We're just doing point of service. And then they let you get on the wait list.
Okay. And even if you're not, we're told that if they're not registered, they have to be in the States to register in a new TRICARE duty, location.
Because they're not going to pull their information because they are signing up as a point of service. And even if they wanted to get seen, authorizations are only good for so many months, especially for an evaluation. And sometimes those authorizations expire before a family is even able to get in if there's a wait list. So you just have to say that once they're coming up on the wait list, the pediatrician is going to place the authorization, or the PCM is going to. But in the meantime, the family is willing to do a point of service.
There's a reason Austin's helping host. She's an expert and a wonderful resource for everyone. Austin, I'm sure you've dropped some resources in there, but if you want to drop anything for EFM or any places where people can connect, I will be summarizing this call combined with the other call. Obviously, it's going to inform the articles that I write about this topic, but also I will, like I said, summarize these conversations on my website. And so we can kind of continue that conversation. I highly recommend that you share with others so we can get more experiences and kind of better understand what's going on. But thank you all for coming. I really appreciate you being willing to kind of share some very personal stories with me and, the world, essentially. So thank you. I know that Austin's going to, like she said, she's dropping some stuff in there, resources, but feel free also to connect with each other on any questions that you might have. This does not have to end here. It's just kind of the starting point of a conversation, but thanks everybody. Have a good one.